Jimmy Stewart, the Hollywood star who vanished on secret WW2 missions over Germany. The night air in Hollywood was electric, a tapestry of glimmering lights and star-studded glamour. But beneath the surface of this cinematic paradise, an unsettling tension simmered. As the world edged closer to chaos, one man found himself standing at a crossroads between fame and duty. Was it worth the risk to trade the spotlight for the unknown? Jimmy Stewart, the charming and introspective actor with a voice that could soothe the most restless of spirits, stood at the entrance of the bustling Grauman's Chinese theater. His heart raced as he absorbed the cacophony of shouts, laughter, and the click of cameras capturing the magic of a film premiere. Against the backdrop of a world teetering on the brink of war, he was the picture of success, yet deep inside, he felt the weight of an impending decision. "Jimmy! Over here," called out a voice that sliced through the crowd. It was Margaret Maggie Bennett, his childhood friend, her blonde curls bouncing as she waved enthusiastically. She had always been the one to keep him grounded, a beacon of reason amidst the chaos of Hollywood's glitz. But tonight, her eyes sparkled with a mix of admiration and concern. As he approached her, the flashes of the cameras illuminated their faces, momentarily blinding him. The excitement of the event washed over him, but Maggie's presence reminded him of the shadows lurking beyond the lights. "Did you see how they cheered?" Jimmy said, attempting to mask his inner turmoil. But Maggie's smile faltered, her brow furrowing slightly. "Jimmy, it's wonderful, but have you thought about what's happening in the world?" "The war?" she asked, her voice low. The joy in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a seriousness that pierced through the glamour. He glanced away, the laughter of the attendees fading into white noise. "I can't ignore it, Maggie. But I have a career to think about. This is my dream." Maggie stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if that dream comes at a cost? What if you don't come back?" The words hung heavily in the air between them, a stark contrast to the jubilant atmosphere surrounding them. The ground beneath his feet felt uncertain as the reality of her concerns seeped into his mind. Jimmy had always been a dreamer, a man who thrived in stories of heroism and adventure. But now, as the specter of war loomed large, the dichotomy of his desires weighed heavily on his conscience. The lights of Hollywood felt dazzling yet deceptive, a facade hiding the impending chaos. "Jimmy! We need you for the next scene," a production assistant called, breaking the moment. He turned back to the excitement, but his heart remained tethered to Maggie's worried gaze. "I'll be right there," he replied, forcing a smile. Yet, as he walked away, he could feel the tug of duty pulling him in a different direction. The glamour of the red carpet faded, overshadowed by the reality of the world outside. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers of war grew louder. The studio executives, once eager to capitalize on his rising fame, began to pressure him. The newsreels broadcasted images of soldiers and the devastation sweeping across Europe. Each evening, as he sat alone in his luxurious Hollywood home, the flickering images on the screen pierced through his indifference, igniting a spark of responsibility that he could no longer ignore. It was on a particularly tense afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Hollywood, that he made his decision. He would enlist, trading the glitz of his career for the uncertainty of service. That evening, he met with General Charles Whitaker, a stern man with a presence that demanded respect. They sat in a modest office, the walls adorned with photographs of heroes past. Jimmy's heart pounded in his chest as he spoke of his desire to serve. "Mr. Stewart," the general began, his voice gravelly yet inviting, "I've seen many men come through these doors with dreams of glory. But it takes more than just a desire to fight. It takes courage, commitment, and the willingness to face the unknown." "I understand, sir. I want to do my part," Jimmy replied, determination etching itself into his features. The general studied him, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "I believe you have potential, Mr. Stewart. We can use men like you on special missions, but they won't be easy. Are you prepared for the risks?" In that moment, the weight of his decision settled heavily on his shoulders. He thought of Maggie, her worried expression flashing through his mind, and the life he would leave behind. Yet, the call of duty resonated louder than the siren song of stardom. "Yes, sir. I'm ready," he affirmed, the words carrying a resolve that surprised even him. As he stepped out of the office, a cold wind swept through the streets, biting at his skin. The bright lights of Hollywood began to feel like a distant memory, fading into the darkness of uncertainty. The city that once felt like home now seemed foreign, each corner echoing with laughter that felt increasingly hollow. When he returned to his apartment, he found Maggie waiting for him, her expression a mix of anticipation and dread. "Jimmy, you look different." "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I enlisted," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. The admission hung heavily in the air, and her face paled as realization washed over her. "Why? You had everything. You could keep making movies, inspiring people," she exclaimed, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "It's not enough, Maggie. I need to do something that matters. I can't just stand by while the world burns," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "What if you don't come back? What if this costs you your life?" "I don't know," he admitted, the uncertainty washing over him like a dark tide. "But I have to try." They stood in silence, the weight of his decision hanging heavily between them. In that moment, Jimmy knew he had chosen a path that would change the course of his life forever. The allure of Hollywood faded into the background, replaced by the stark reality of duty, sacrifice, and the unknown. As he prepared for his departure, the days blurred into a whirlwind of training and anticipation. Each moment spent with Maggie felt bittersweet, filled with laughter and unspoken fears. They wandered through the streets of their childhood, reminiscing about simpler times, the laughter echoing against the fading backdrop of a world on the brink of war. But the clock was ticking, and soon, their time together would be up. As the sun set on Hollywood, casting an orange glow over the city, Jimmy stood at the precipice of a new chapter, a chapter that would take him far from the comforts of home and into the heart of darkness. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. Yet, as he looked towards the horizon, he felt a flicker of hope. For in the depths of despair, there lay the possibility of heroism, of making a difference, and of returning home once more, if only he could survive the trials that awaited him. The sun dipped below the Hollywood hills, casting a warm glow over the city as the chatter of the film industry buzzed around him. Yet, for Jimmy Stewart, the vibrant colors of the sunset felt muted, overshadowed by the weight of his decision. He had traded his tailored suits and scripted lines for the bulky uniform of an Army Air Corps pilot, a choice that left echoes of uncertainty in his heart. The training camp was a far cry from the bright lights of Hollywood. The air was thick with the scent of oil and fuel, and the sounds of roaring engines replaced the melodic laughter of studio sets. Jimmy stood beside a sleek B-24 Liberator, staring at the machine that would soon become his home in the skies. It was a marvel of engineering, but it also represented the dangers that lay ahead. Would he be brave enough to face what awaited him in the skies over Germany? "Stewart!" A voice broke through his thoughts. It was General Charles Whitaker, his commanding officer, a man whose stern demeanor masked a deep respect for his men. "We're going up in the air today. You ready?" Jimmy nodded, though a knot tightened in his stomach. He had dreamed of flying ever since he was a boy, but now, that dream felt like a double-edged sword. He was about to confront the reality of war, a reality that was filled with risks he had never considered. As they boarded the aircraft, memories of his last moments with Maggie flooded back, her worried eyes and gentle touch as she had urged him to reconsider. "You don't have to do this, Jimmy," she had said, her voice trembling. "Hollywood needs you. I need you." They had shared dreams of the future, plans that felt so far away now. But the roar of the engines drowned out those thoughts. The aircraft shuddered as it lifted off the ground, and Jimmy gripped the controls, forcing himself to focus. He felt the rush of adrenaline mixed with fear as they climbed higher. The world below shrank, and for a moment, he felt invincible. Yet, as they soared, the reality of his mission settled in. A part of him longed for the stage, the applause, the simplicity of acting. But another part was awakening, a sense of duty, a drive to protect those he loved. The mission briefings had been clear: bomb runs over enemy territory. Each flight was a test of skill and nerves, pushing them to their limits. As they flew over the vast expanse of Germany, the landscape below transformed into a patchwork of fields and towns, the beauty of it starkly contrasting with the cold reality of their mission. The crew was tense, and Jimmy could feel the pressure mounting. Doubts gnawed at him. Was he truly ready for this responsibility? On their third mission, they encountered heavy flak. The aircraft bucked violently, and Jimmy struggled to keep it steady. Alarms blared, and his crew shouted commands, their voices lost in the chaos. He glanced at his co-pilot, a young man named Tom, who wore a mask of fear. "Stay with me, Tom. We can do this," Jimmy shouted, though his own heart raced. They emerged from the barrage, but not unscathed. As they landed back at the base, the mood was somber. They had lost one of their own, a friend and fellow pilot who had been shot down during the mission. The grief struck Jimmy hard, like a punch to the gut. He had signed up to fight, to protect freedom, but the cost was becoming painfully real. He felt the weight of his choices crashing down on him, and the burden of his new identity as a soldier began to take its toll. Back in Hollywood, Maggie Bennett sat at her typewriter, the keys clicking beneath her fingers. She poured her heart into her writing, crafting stories that chronicled the lives of soldiers, especially those who had gone missing. Each article was a plea for awareness, a call for the public to understand the sacrifices being made. But with each passing day, she faced increasing censorship. Editors were reluctant to publish stories that painted the military in a negative light, fearing backlash from the government and the public. Maggie's frustration grew as she dug deeper into the mystery of the missing soldiers. She often found herself staring at a photograph of Jimmy, his dapper smile a stark reminder of the man she cared for. "What are you doing out there, Jimmy?" she whispered to the empty room, her heart heavy with worry. She felt powerless, her words unable to bridge the distance that war had created between them. One evening, she visited a local bar where veterans gathered, hoping to glean insights from their experiences. As she listened to their tales of bravery and loss, she realized that many were haunted by the same fears that plagued her. They spoke of missions that never made the headlines, of friends whose names were absent from the lists of those who returned. The more stories she heard, the more determined she became to expose the truth. "Why do you care so much?" a veteran named Sam asked her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You're not even out there. You can't understand." Maggie met his gaze, her voice steady. "I care because I can't sit idly by while the world forgets. These men deserve to be remembered, their stories told." Sam softened, nodding slowly. "Just be careful. Some truths are dangerous." Meanwhile, Jimmy's training intensified. Each flight became a blend of exhilaration and dread. He began to bond with his crew, sharing stories during brief moments of downtime. They were men from different backgrounds, all united by a common purpose. He learned about Tom's dreams of becoming an architect, and how another crew member, Dave, had a family waiting for him back home. Each story deepened the sense of camaraderie, but also the pain of knowing that one missed heartbeat could change everything. As they prepared for another mission, Jimmy received news that sent a chill down his spine. A confidential assignment had been handed down from higher-ups, one that would require him to gather intelligence on a secret weapon being developed in Germany. The mission was dangerous, and the risks were immense. He shared the news with his crew during a tense briefing, their faces filled with concern. "Are we prepared for this?" Tom asked, his voice laced with anxiety. "We're already stretched thin." Jimmy felt the weight of their expectations. "We have to be. It's our job to protect what we love. If we don't take this chance, we may lose everything." The words hung heavy in the air, resonating with the reality of their situation. They were not just fighting for their country but for the people they loved, the ones waiting for them back home. That night, as Jimmy lay in his bunk, thoughts of Maggie flooded his mind again. He wondered if she was safe, if she was still writing, still fighting for the truth. He wished he could reach out, to tell her that he was okay, that he would return to her. But the distance was palpable, and every day spent in the war felt like a day further away from his old life. In her own corner of the world, Maggie sat at her desk, determined to write an article that would uncover the truths of the missing soldiers. She knew the risks, but the thought of Jimmy pushed her forward. She envisioned their reunion, a moment when they would share stories of courage and survival. As the days turned into weeks, both Jimmy and Maggie found themselves at a precipice. The war was threatening to consume them, but it also ignited a fire within. They were fighting for more than just survival, they were fighting for each other, for the dreams they once shared. And as the next mission loomed on the horizon, Jimmy's heart raced not just with fear, but with the resolve to protect those he loved. Stay tuned, he thought, there's more to come. If you're captivated by this unfolding story of courage, dedication, and love, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we continue to explore the life of Jimmy Stewart and the hidden stories of the heroes of World War II. Don't miss out on the next chapter in this riveting tale. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over the vast expanse of the European theater. It was late 1944, and Jimmy Stewart's B-24 Liberator rumbled through the clouds, its engines roaring like the distant thunder of an approaching storm. Tension wound tightly in the cockpit as the crew prepared for yet another critical mission over Germany, a mission that could turn the tide of war. As they neared the target, the air thickened with anxiety. Jimmy glanced at his co-pilot, Lieutenant Tom Harris, whose face was a mask of concentration. The crew had become a family, forged in the crucible of fear and camaraderie, but now, a sense of unease hung over them like a shroud. Jimmy's heart raced, not just from the thrill of flying but from an instinctual fear that something was about to go terribly wrong. "Stewart, you ready for this?" Tom asked, his voice steady but laced with apprehension. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jimmy replied, forcing a grin, though inside, he felt a gnawing doubt. He had flown many missions, but the stakes had never felt so high. The Germans were waiting, their defenses as sharp as a hawk's talons, prepared to take down any plane that dared invade their airspace. A sudden jolt shook the aircraft, and alarms blared as a flurry of anti-aircraft fire erupted around them. Shells exploded in a dazzling display of fire and smoke, and the Liberator shuddered violently. "Evasive maneuvers!" Jimmy shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. The crew responded with practiced precision, but the damage was done. An explosion rocked the plane as a shell struck its wing, sending the Liberator spiraling towards the ground. Panic surged through Jimmy as he fought to regain control. "Mayday! Mayday!" he yelled into the radio, but the static swallowed his words. "Jimmy, we're going down!" Tom shouted, his voice laced with terror. With a surge of adrenaline, Jimmy made the split-second decision. "Get ready to bail out." He ripped off his oxygen mask, knowing their only chance lay in abandoning the plane. "On 3! 1, 2, before they could jump, another explosion rocked the aircraft, and the cockpit filled with smoke. Jimmy's world turned upside down as the plane lurched violently. He felt himself being thrown against the controls, pain exploding through his body. "Eject! Eject!" he screamed, but the words barely left his lips before he was forced from his seat. In an instant, he was free, plummeting through the frigid air. The ground rushed toward him, a blurred tapestry of greens and browns. As he pulled the parachute cord, the sudden jerk of the chute opening jolted him awake. The world spun around him as he descended, the distant sounds of explosions fading into the background. But he wasn't out of danger yet. He landed hard in a remote patch of forest, the impact jarring his bones. Dazed and disoriented, Jimmy struggled to regain his bearings. He had survived the crash, but now he was deep in enemy territory, alone and vulnerable. Back in Hollywood, Margaret Maggie Bennett paced her small apartment, anxiety gnawing at her insides. Days had turned into weeks since she last heard from Jimmy, and her worry grew with each passing hour. The news of missing soldiers weighed heavily on her heart, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, while sifting through government archives for her latest article, she stumbled upon documents that made her blood run cold. They detailed covert operations, secret missions that involved high-profile soldiers, men like Jimmy Stewart. The government had been concealing their true motives, and the more she read, the more she realized that the very fabric of the war was woven with deception. Maggie's heart raced as she pieced together the shocking revelations. Jimmy had not just been a pilot, he had been a part of something far more dangerous, something that could change the narrative of the war. The missions were shrouded in secrecy, and many soldiers had vanished without a trace. Her instincts screamed for action. She needed to find Jimmy and expose the truth about the missing soldiers. But how? The government was tight-lipped, and every source she tried to contact was silenced before she could speak. She was up against a wall, but she refused to back down. With newfound determination, Maggie began contacting anyone who might have information, even if it meant putting herself in danger. She needed to unravel the mystery behind Jimmy's disappearance, to find him before it was too late. Meanwhile, Jimmy found himself stumbling through dense underbrush, the weight of his survival pressing heavily on his shoulders. His instincts kicked in, and he began to move cautiously through the forest, knowing that enemy patrols were likely searching for him. He needed to gather information about the enemy's plans and get back to his comrades. As he navigated the terrain, memories of Maggie flooded his mind. He could almost hear her voice, urging him to be careful, to come home safe. The thought fueled his resolve. He had to return to her, to show her that the war was not just a cinematic tale but a brutal reality filled with sacrifices. After hours of trekking, Jimmy stumbled upon a German encampment. The flickering light of a fire illuminated the faces of soldiers gathered around, their laughter echoing through the night. He crept closer, heart pounding in his chest, listening intently. The soldiers spoke in their native tongue, discussing future operations and troop movements. With every word he overheard, Jimmy felt the weight of his mission intensify. This was the information his country needed, the kind that could save countless lives. But just as he was about to turn back to report, he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. A familiar face, a fellow soldier from his squad, was among the Germans. It was Lieutenant Karl Becker, a man he once thought of as a friend, now standing among the enemy. The betrayal pierced through him like a bullet. What had happened to Karl? Why was he here? Jimmy's heart raced as he fought to process the implications. Was Karl a traitor, or had he been forced into this position? The lines of loyalty and duty blurred in Jimmy's mind. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut: the war was more complex than he ever imagined. The truth was layered in deceit, and survival came at a cost. As Jimmy retreated from the camp, his mind whirled with questions. He had to get back to base, to warn his superiors, but how could he explain what he had seen? The answers were elusive, and the stakes had never been higher. He needed to find Maggie. She would understand the gravity of the situation. Back in Hollywood, Maggie pressed on, fueled by her need to uncover the truth. She had managed to secure a meeting with a source who promised to provide information about the missing soldiers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she arrived at a dimly lit cafe, her heart racing with anticipation. But when she sat down across from her contact, the atmosphere shifted. The man's eyes darted nervously around the room, and he leaned in close. "You need to know that digging too deep can be dangerous," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes. "There are forces at play that don't want the truth to come out, forces that could silence you for good." Maggie's pulse quickened. "I'm not afraid," she replied firmly. "I need to know what happened to Jimmy." The man hesitated before unfolding a stack of documents. As Maggie scanned the papers, her breath caught in her throat. The information was explosive, evidence of cover-ups, hidden missions, and a tangled web of betrayal that reached high into the military ranks. But before she could process it all, a shadow loomed over their table. She looked up to see two men in suits, their expressions cold and calculating. "Miss Bennett, we need to talk," one said, his tone brokering no argument. Maggie's heart sank as she realized the danger was closer than she had thought. The men were not just interested in her article, they were intent on silencing her. But she wasn't going to back down, not now, not after everything she had uncovered. As she stood to leave, the weight of her mission pressed down on her. She had to save Jimmy, to expose the truth, and to find a way to navigate the treacherous waters of war and deception. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. In the shadows of the forest, as Jimmy made his way back to safety, he knew that the war had changed him forever. He was no longer just an actor playing a role, he was a man grappling with the harsh realities of sacrifice and loyalty. The world he returned to would be different, and he feared the secrets he carried would haunt him long after the war was over. The climax of their intertwined fates was approaching, and the truths they uncovered would not only redefine their lives but also the very fabric of the war itself. The revelation of betrayal, loyalty, and the fight for truth was just beginning, and neither of them would emerge unchanged. The sun dipped low over Hollywood, casting long shadows across the familiar streets that had once felt like a dream for Jimmy Stewart. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of nostalgia mixed with the faint aroma of popcorn from a nearby theater. But now, the glimmering lights seemed duller, the laughter more distant. Having returned from the chaos of war, he felt like a ghost in a world that had moved on without him. The mission that had taken him away from the spotlight was shrouded in layers of secrecy, and the trauma of what he had experienced haunted him. Each night, as he lay in bed, the images of his fallen comrades and the harrowing moments of survival replayed in his mind, making sleep an elusive sanctuary. He had been hailed a hero, but the title felt heavy, laden with memories of loss and sacrifice. Maggie had been his anchor during his absence. She had poured her heart into her writing, capturing the struggles of soldiers like Jimmy and shedding light on the grim realities of war. Her articles had gained attention, stirring public sentiment and igniting conversations about the sacrifices made by those who served. The truth she unveiled had not only informed the masses but had also reached Jimmy, giving him a flicker of hope while he was still in the shadows of enemy territory. Now, as he stood on the cusp of his old life, he knew he needed to confront the changes within himself. He was no longer just the charming actor who dazzled on screen, he was a man marked by experience, transformed by the harsh realities of life and death. With every step he took toward his old haunts, he felt the weight of his new identity pressing down. Maggie sat at a cafe table, her eyes scanning the bustling street, a mix of anticipation and concern lighting her face. When she spotted Jimmy, her expression softened, and she leaped to her feet. "Jimmy!" she exclaimed, rushing to him. They embraced tightly, the warmth of her presence momentarily easing the burdens he carried. "You look different," she said softly, her gaze searching his eyes for the man she had known. "I feel different," he admitted, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "The war changes you in ways you can't always explain." Maggie nodded, understanding threading through her expression. "I've read your mission reports. You did incredible things, Jimmy. You made a difference." He shook his head, a deep frown creasing his brow. "But at what cost? So many lives were lost, Maggie. I wish we could have done more." "You did what you had to do," she insisted, her voice steady. "You risked everything to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That's heroism." The conversation shifted, layers of unspoken feelings surfacing. Jimmy shared stories of camaraderie, sacrifice, and the moments that made him question everything, the ethics of war, the innocence lost, and the humanity that flickered even in the darkest places. Each word was a catharsis, peeling back the layers of pain and allowing him to breathe again. Maggie listened intently, her heart aching for the weight he carried. "You don't have to carry this alone, Jimmy. I'm here for you," she said, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, Jimmy felt the stirrings of hope. His journey back to himself had only just begun, but with Maggie by his side, he realized he didn't have to walk this path in solitude. Days turned into weeks, and Jimmy slowly acclimated to the rhythms of civilian life. He attended support groups for veterans, sharing his story and listening to others, gradually finding solace in the shared experiences of those who had faced similar trials. With each meeting, he felt the chains of his past loosening their grip. Maggie became his partner in healing. She encouraged him to write about his experiences, not just for the public but for himself. With her unwavering support, he began to pen a memoir, channeling his emotions into words, transforming his trauma into a narrative of resilience. Through writing, he found clarity. he discovered that his experiences, however painful, could inspire others to confront their demons. In his heart, he held a desire to bridge the gap between the civilians and soldiers, to foster understanding and compassion. As his memoir neared completion, Maggie's articles continued to resonate with readers, sparking discussions about the realities of war and the importance of mental health for returning soldiers. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups, she turned to him, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Jimmy, we should hold an event, a forum for veterans to share their stories and connect with the community. It could help so many." He considered her words, the idea resonating deeply. "You're right. It's about time we open a dialogue. People need to understand what we went through and how they can help." With their combined efforts, they organized a community event that brought together veterans and civilians. The auditorium buzzed with energy as stories were shared, tears were shed, and laughter echoed through the halls. Jimmy took the stage, his heart pounding, but this time not from fear. He spoke candidly about his journey, the triumphs and tragedies, and the importance of connection. As the audience listened, he could see the impact of his words. Faces softened with understanding, eyes glistened with empathy, and a sense of unity formed in the room. He felt a weight lift, the burden of his past transforming into a beacon of hope for others. When the event concluded, Maggie stood by his side, pride radiating from her. "You did it, Jimmy. You reached them." He smiled, the warmth of her support enveloping him. "No, we did it. Together." As they stepped outside, the night air was filled with renewed energy, and the stars sparkled overhead like a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world. Jimmy realized that while the scars of war would always be a part of him, they no longer defined him. He had reclaimed his voice and purpose. As they walked hand in hand, he turned to Maggie, a thought forming in his mind. "You know, I think this is just the beginning for us." She looked at him, a knowing smile on her lips. "I think so too." With a renewed sense of purpose and a heart full of hope, Jimmy Stewart had finally found his way back, not just to Hollywood, but to himself. As the story of his journey spread, he hoped it would inspire others to share their truths, to embrace their struggles, and to find strength in vulnerability. If you've been inspired by Jimmy's journey and know someone who could use a little hope, share this video. Let's create a community where stories are shared, and healing can begin. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. And hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next story of courage and resilience. Together, we can shine a light on the paths we've walked and the ones we're still forging. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story matters.